I don't know if I've said it before and I can't be asked to check, so in case I haven't, let me just say it now because it's relevant to this video. Fuck Blaire White. She's a neo-fascist, racist, transphobic, transmedicalist, true scum ladder hoister. She's talked before about how difficult her transition was, and how much she struggled, and yet now she's out the other end. She's a passing trans woman with wealth, privilege and respect. She's turning around and spreading anti-trans and actual fascist talking points and bullshit. Blaire White is the new Milo, basically, a far-right figure who was also a member of a marginalised group, so other far-right figures can point to her and say, hey, look everyone, we're not transphobic, we have a trans person on our side. And she also thinks that trans people are child predators. She's a token fascist. She's betrayed all other trans people for a media career and a privileged position in the far-right YouTube sphere. She's encouraged harassment, actually led harassment campaigns against other trans people who have done nothing wrong for no reason other than clicks and cheap outrage, and basically is just a fucking scumbag. As you can probably tell, I don't like Blaire White, and since we're on the subject, let's go over a few things she's said recently, shall we? Here are some of her recent, non-deleted tweets. Any gender can get you an education to prevent you from saying dumb shit like this. If accepting trans people equals 11-year-olds transitioning, biological males destroying women in sports, dating trans people, or you're a bigot, then don't expect acceptance anytime soon. The insanity is too much. Happy Halloween to everyone who acts like I'm the devil for having a different opinion to them, which is funny because she literally demonizes other people who feel differently to her, most infamously of course Riley J. Dennis. If you believe children shouldn't be able to drive, drink alcohol, get a tattoo, but should be able to chemically castrate themselves in transition, you're either a monster or a fucking moron, which is of course based on complete fabrication. This doesn't happen. Puberty blockers are not the same thing as chemical castration or even physical transition. If you can't have friends who disagree with you politically, you're emotionally and mentally weak. Can't relate. Which is all well and good to say until one of your friends starts to say that maybe you're just a man in a dress, or that you're a degenerate, or one of the many other things that the right wing like to call their so-called friends. Blaire White is on the same side as Ben Shapiro, who literally thinks she's a mentally ill man. Oh, this is a good one. This one is actually based on a copy-pasta tweet directly copied from a literal neo-Nazi who is talking about the LGBTQ plus community as a whole. Trans. I'm trans. Society. K. Trans. Here are my pronouns. Society. K. Trans people. I'm gonna have to do this. Wax my balls and give hormones to kids or you're a bigot. No one says this. Okay, that's a little too far. Trans. Fuck you, fascist. Society. Okay, fuck it then, I give up. Trans. OMG, why does everyone hate me? So, just in case you weren't aware, this tweet hasn't been deleted, by the way, this is still up on her Twitter. She is literally equivocating all trans people with Jezki Neve, a literal predator. And later on in this video, we'll see that she actually doesn't believe that, and she actually believes the opposite, and yet here she is sharing literal neo-Nazi memes about demonizing demographics of which she is a part. A transgender 3-year-old is like a vegan cat. We all know who's making the lifestyle choices. Again, I'm not sure if any trans 3-year-olds exist. I'm not sure if that's a thing. I haven't really researched it very much, but I do know that later in life, like 10-ish, that's when trans kids do start to realise that they are trans. I think the youngest transition I've seen is a 7-year-old who was recently the focus of a massive right-wing misinformation campaign in which the bigots all just made the baseless assertion that actually a transgender child's mother was forcing her to be trans, even though that diagnosis was backed up by multiple paediatricians and gender experts. And also, of course, the most they were going to do was allow her to wear dresses because she was 7 and not even about to hit puberty, so puberty blockers wouldn't even be a thing, and even if they were, there have been multiple studies showing that puberty blockers have literally zero negative impact on a child if they then decide that actually it was a phase and they're not trans or whatever, which apparently the right wing believes happens all the time. Likewise, the opposite of the implication is true, because here the vegan cat thing has literally killed cats. And yes, there are some idiots who believe that you can have a vegan cat, which isn't true, but on the other hand, having a trans child and not allowing them to transition or in any way identify with the gender they feel most comfortable with can lead to suicides. So it's actually the opposite that's true. Not allowing the child to transition, forcing forcing them to associate with a gender which they do not feel comfortable with actually leads to deaths in the same way that forcing a cat not to eat meat will. Yeah, so she's fucking delightful. Now that I've sufficiently poisoned the well and vented about my particular dislike for this woman, let's dig into one of her most recent videos, shall we? It's actually based on one of those aforementioned tweets. Let's see how Blaire White, a trans woman, invalidates pro-trans and trans-inclusive messages like any gender can get their period, shall we? This is how the video, which is of course 10 minutes and 2 seconds long in order to maximise the ad revenue, starts. Ooh, haha, how witty. Blaire White, a trans woman, is buying tampons, but she doesn't get a period? The height of comedy. I can see now why Ricky Gervais is such a big fan of hers. Honestly, this skit is so boring, unfunny, and lazy that I might even call it nostalgia critic level, and that's saying something.
God, I love being a YouTuber. You get to go to work in your pajamas.
Yowza, that's quite the onesie. Interesting display of patriotism for a nation the leader of which dehumanizes you and actively legislates against you in order to curtail your rights there. Okay, I'm sorry, let's actually let Blaire speak.
And no one judges you. You're not gonna judge me, right?
I kinda hate Blaire's weird, popular, bitchy high school girl way of talking, incidentally, but no, wearing pajamas is not worth judgment. Bigotry, though, that definitely is.
Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today's topic is gross. And I wish it wasn't relevant, but it is, so we're going to discuss it.
See, this is weird to me. Like, periods are only gross if you allow them to be. They're a natural part of the human body's functioning, so if you really have such an issue with it, I don't know what to say to you other than grow the fuck up. Then there's about 1.5 minutes of ads showing off that she's friends with someone who was last relevant 10 years ago. Yes, I have seen the Jake Paul documentary, and it's terrible. And announcements for Blaire's merch store in which you can buy hoodies that make people on the street look at you and roll their eyes as they see what a tool you are. So skipping that because it's not really relevant and I have no intention of buying a hoodie that says straight white male on it. Partly because it's not true, but also because I don't want to look like a twat. So basically this video is about the relatively recent discourse around the phrase every gender can get their period, which is true because trans people exist and can be any gender, but let's see how Blaire interprets the situation.
Today's video is about something that I don't really know why this is such a relevant topic and point of debate right now. You know, if I had it my way, we wouldn't even really be talking about this, but I guess we have to. Periods, menstrual cycles. Yeah, that.
Can't relate.
So a lot of you guys have probably seen all the viral memes and tweets and news stories going around. Any gender can get their period. All genders can get their period.
Yeah, some of these are a little weird, but this is one of Blaire White's favourite tactics, and indeed is a right-wing tactic in general. We actually saw it in the Paul Joseph Watson video I put out relatively recently, taking extreme examples of people of opposing viewpoints and using them to tar everyone of that group with the same brush, which is incredibly frustrating because obviously she doesn't want the same to be done in reverse. The whole Jessica Yaniv saga showed that, and as Blaire said, she wanted to be seen as a trans woman calling other trans women out when they do bad shit, except when she wants to garner likes by throwing other trans people under the bus with literal neo-Nazi memes. So it's weird that she's then equivocating the people who say that any gender can get their period with people who leave used tampons on the floor of a public toilet when she was adamant that Yaniv needed to have an example made of her so people didn't equivocate trans people with sexual predators, although they were already doing that and will continue to do so for the foreseeable future because bigotry is not logical. This is the sort of hypocrisy that's going to come up again and again. Blaire White is the ultimate hypocrite, as we shall now see. Thing is, it's not incorrect. Like, in order to not believe this, or to make a montage of people saying it with circus music behind it, one would have to believe that trans people are not the gender that they say they are, which is odd for Blaire, being a trans woman, but okay then, I guess.
There is just this hysteria around menstrual cycles that I have never seen in my life because for the life of me, if I can remember, the only thing I've ever heard about periods and menstrual cycles, you know, from women is that they wish they didn't have it. So this thing that I've always heard have been like the bane of women's existence is now people are fighting over who can have it and who can't have it and who wants it and do you want it? Let's all... What? You know, I really don't know when we entered this alternate universe and or simulation and or hellscape, but we're here.
Yeah, no, that's clearly not true. Blaire is reframing the issue in an incredibly obvious and dishonest way here. No one is saying that they want periods. Pretty much everyone who gets them absolutely hates periods, and they have my undying sympathy, but this debate isn't trans women or cis women wishing they had periods or fighting for their rights to get periods or whatever, but pointing out that the assumption that only women can menstruate is cis-normative and demonstrably incorrect because trans people can also menstruate. Like, that's it. In order to disbelieve that, she would necessarily have to believe that trans women aren't women, because in order to believe that only women can menstruate, she therefore has to believe that trans men are not men.
So I came across this picture of a trans artist doing what's called free bleeding to prove that men and women can get periods. And you know, my initial reaction was to gag and then cover my entire body in hand sanitizer, and then I realized I should probably make a video about this. So let's get one thing out of the way. Technically, trans men, so female to male trans people, which are the opposite of me, can still get their period, I guess, if they are not on testosterone.
This is an art piece. This person is an artist making a political point. I very much doubt that they walk around like that all the time, and if they do, it's to draw attention to a serious issue that needs to be addressed. Honestly, I doubt that that's even real blood if it's an art piece.
But from all the research I've done on google.com, apparently testosterone eventually stops your menstrual cycle, and it's not something you have to go through anymore if you are transitioning to male.
Wrong! So this is actually not true. As Blaire pointed out, one does not need to be on hormones to transition, meaning that even if this were completely true that testosterone stops the menstrual cycle in its tracks, there would still be a lot of trans men who menstruate, but let's ignore that for now. T can stop periods, but it's not a guarantee and it varies from person to person. Even if it does though, there are reasons trans men or non-binary folks may still menstruate. For example, if they've not been on T for long enough for it to start affecting their menstrual cycle, or if they had to come off T for a while, either for medical reasons or because they want to remain fertile whilst they freeze their eggs or whatever, which Blaire should understand because she made a whole video about temporarily going off hormones a while back.
I am going off hormones. So I'm sitting here wondering why people are trying to force this whole, like, any gender can get their period down our throat.
The shoving it down our throats thing is a standard right-wing talking point here and basically just applies to any kind of activists making a point. Why can't those oppressed minorities just shut up and suffer in silence? Why must they make me aware that they exist rather than hiding indoors like some kind of pariah?
When I don't think trans men really want to even acknowledge that. Like, when it comes to gender dysphoria, I would imagine that that would be the most dysphoria-inducing thing in the world.
Yes, but that doesn't make it not an issue, it just means that it's worth risking dysphoria for. Blaire has made videos about her genitals in the past despite claiming that they make her dysphoric, presumably because she weighed up the value of sharing her perspective and giving these issues exposure that they may not otherwise receive against her dysphoria.
Honestly, to me, it just seems like a really huge virtue signal. I mean...
Virtue signaling is a made-up concept. All it means is pretending to care about an issue for clout, which is basically just a way for the right to point at people and accuse them of being disingenuous for caring about things. How does Blaire know that these people don't genuinely care about this issue? I know I do, but I'm not about to judge anyone else on their intentions, unlike Blaire, who is both psychic and clairvoyant, apparently. Like, later on in this video, Blaire is going to try and act like cis women are being excluded and picked on by massive brands. But I'm not going to accuse her virtue signaling, because whilst I believe she's an incredibly dishonest person, I'm sure she probably does on some level actually believe what she's saying.
Just look at this. So this one actually upset me. I don't know if this child is biologically female and presenting as a boy. I don't know what's going on, but no matter the age, no matter the gender of this child, they don't know what a period is. First of all, can we not utilize toddlers for political messaging at all? Like, let's let kids be kids. And the second thing is, if we're gonna use them, can it not be about bodily functions that they don't even understand?
Are you serious? Have you seen how much the right use kids for political messaging? Also, really, who gives a shit? I very much doubt that this kid was emotionally scarred by holding up a sign they probably can't even read for a picture.
Like, apparently this image was in a magazine. It's viral all over the internet. I blurred the kid's face because I just feel really bad. But this kid's gonna have to live with the fact that their parents made them hold this sign up forever. And that's just really tragic. Honestly tragic.
Yeah, I mean, in 20 years' time, they'll probably be turned down for job interviews because one time they had their picture taken when they were a baby holding up a sign. Come on, Blaire, be realistic. This picture is going to have literally zero impact on their life other than right-wing weirdos who want to use it as an excuse to harass the family, because that's definitely a thing that happens.
This is Shane's gloss, by the way. So good.
Hey, just a reminder, I have a friend who was really famous in 2009.
And in a brand new episode of trans activists fighting for everything but legitimate trans rights, the feminine hygiene brand Always recently changed their packaging to remove any semblance of female symbols and make the packaging gender neutral to accommodate non-binary people.
The feminine hygiene brand Always is officially removing the Venus symbol from its products. The company is making the change in an attempt to make the labeling more inclusive of transgender and non-binary customers.
Yes, because the right to have your bodily functions acknowledged and not have your experience raised by society is not legitimate trans rights, obviously. This is a non-story. I genuinely have never met anyone not on the extreme anti-trans bandwagon who gives a shit about this.
Now, I'm not offended that they changed the coloring of their packaging or removed the female symbol from their packaging, but I will say that, just as a business-minded person that I do consider myself somewhat to be, it would seem that although some self-identified non-binary people do probably buy your products, is it really that pressing of an issue that you have to potentially alienate the 99.9999999% of customers who buy your product who are women for these 0.000000001% that are non-binary? What's going on?
You are at best a small business owner. Always is a company under the umbrella of mega corporation Procter & Gamble, which collectively is worth $230 billion worldwide. I think they have a pretty solid grasp on what they're doing. For example, with this move, they've created a controversy which has made everyone talk about their brand for a couple of news cycles, including you, Blaire. No one's being alienated. If anyone was buying tampons specifically because they had the female symbol on them, that's pretty fucking stupid. And I guarantee you that Always sales won't tank now because of this decision. It's not exclusive, it's inclusive, because I can guarantee that non-binary people and people who support them will buy more Always shit. Incidentally, there are approximately 30 million non-binary people in the world, assuming that half of them menstruate. That is a potential 15 million extra customers Always has secured there.
They say that trans people make up 0.01% of the population. So, among that, you think of non-binary people, which are even more rare than just regular trans people. That's 50 people.
Trans people make up around 1% of the population, and non-binary people make up around 0.4%. If Blaire had done any research pulling numbers out of her ass, she would have known this. It's 15 million people, Blaire.
And you're changing the packaging for them. What? It just doesn't seem like a good idea to me at all. And I'm sure time will tell and sales will tell, but it's really annoying.
Why is it annoying? Can you explain to me how very slightly changing packaging on a product that you don't use is annoying to you, or is it just that you don't like the idea of non-binary people being happy?
Mayhem Miller, who is a famous drag queen from RuPaul's Drag Race, in reaction to this story actually said, "I can't." Trust me, hun, neither can I. Mayhem said, "I think it's absolutely ridiculous. Feminine hygiene products are now under attack for being offensive. What the fuck?" Next, are people going to complain because the Charmin company has bears wiping their ass with tissue because somehow that's exploitation or cruelty or not inclusive enough? At some point, the community should consider what battles are more important. And I completely agree with that statement, and of course, Mayhem got a ton of backlash, which is so crazy.
This whole thing is a pointless non sequitur. Some random drag queen reckons something. Unless she produces a peer-reviewed scientific paper to back up what she reckons is true, who gives a fuck?
Interestingly, because a lot of trans activists and feminists are actually butting heads now, they are not allies anymore.
Yes, because some feminists don't believe that trans people are valid. A lot of feminists do though, so I don't see the point. I consider myself a feminist, and I absolutely believe that trans people are valid. Fuck Jermaine Greer.
A lot of feminists reacted like this: removing powerful female symbols from sanitary products to accommodate the activism of an infinitely small number of men is the ultimate misogyny. There is nothing empowering or inclusive about erasing women and girls from the story of menstruation. And I see her point.
Now she's just quoting and siding with TERFs who want Blaire not to exist and believe she's a predatory man pretending to be a woman in order to invade women's spaces. That's the main ideology of TERFs. These are the allies she has chosen. That's actually quite sad.
Yes, there are some trans men out there who do experience menstruation. That is a fact. But the number is so negligible, and listen, the brand can do whatever they want with their packaging, but like, it just, again, it doesn't seem like a smart business move in my opinion.
We've already gone over this, but Blaire, the proud capitalist, is somehow not CEO of a mega corporation worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Why, if she's much more business savvy than Procter & Gamble? Look, this is clear outrage marketing. Procter & Gamble also owned Gillette, and they were extremely successful in increasing their sales with the outrage marketing over the ad that got all the conservatives foaming at the mouth a few months ago. So this is clearly just another attempt at doing that, which, let's be honest here, has worked spectacularly well.
And honestly, when stuff like this happens, I can't help but feel like people are not fighting for anything that matters anymore. Here is a real LGBT issue that I wish we would talk about more, and I'm holding myself accountable that I don't talk about more, but we're going to today. Choose your battles wisely. Instead of bullying brands to change the colors of their tampon packaging, I would really like to point out that 40% of homeless youth are LGBT.
People can care about more than one thing at the same time. It's not like 100% of anyone's effort has to be a single specific issue at any one time. I, for example, can care about the well-being of non-binary people and also be incredibly angry at the atrocities committed by the global capitalist hegemony and people being wrong about Star Wars on the internet. The two aren't mutually exclusive, you know? To make a point, Blaire then talks about what she deems to be a real trans issue, that being the epidemic of homelessness in the LGBTQ+ community, which rather than advocating for an end to homelessness, permanently tearing down the capitalist system or redistributing the empty homes owned by the rich people like her mate Shane Dawson, she instead makes the empty promise to pledge 50% of the ad revenue for this one video to a homeless charity. Incidentally, she posts at least one video a week, which sure is nice of her, but saying homophobic parents shouldn't be homophobic and making a donation to charity doesn't fix a systemic issue, you know? This is a very right-wing way of appearing to care about a problem whilst not actually taking a deeper look at the causes of said problem. Also, maybe building a career off of deriding and victimizing LGBTQ+ people who don't fit within your narrowly defined ideal of what an LGBTQ+ person should be is actually making things worse. Like, the parents who watch your stuff and then have non-binary kids, for example, might look down on them in the same way you do, and therefore be more likely to throw them out. Just a thought. Also, no one is forcing or pressuring corporations to do shit. This was a cold business decision they made to appear more progressive and inclusive than they actually were, and attempt to get more of the non-binary and non-binary supporting customer base. I genuinely don't recall ever seeing anyone start shit online over always having female symbols on their packaging. And that's all from Blaire White today. It's honestly incredibly upsetting to me that she would deride the concept of any gender can have a period as ridiculous SJW pro-PC bullshit or whatever, because it then leaves open the question of, well, what about the opposite? Would Blaire White make the same argument if I were to say, correctly, that every gender can have a penis? Because Blaire has, in the past, made a video explaining that she's not going to get bottom surgery.
But I have not had gender reassignment surgery. And I'm going to talk about why I don't plan on having a gender reassignment surgery anytime in the near future.
Which is 100% fine, obviously is totally her choice, and I completely respect that. But using her own logic, women with penises are such a small percentage of the population. Acknowledging their existence is ridiculous and so on and so forth. Is that dumb shit? If she wants to be logically consistent, it kinda has to be, and now she's invalidating her own existence. It's so weird. The leaps Blaire will make to devalue, dehumanize and hurt other trans people, but will stop just short of taking her rhetoric to its logical conclusion and applying it to herself. Weird that, or at least that was the intention, because as you can see there's still quite a lot of video left to go, and the video is apparently over. Well, you see, while I was writing this video, Blaire uploaded another video attempting to defend herself against accusations of transphobia, which, as we've just established, is definitely a part of her brand, and I would argue is the main reason she's so successful in right-wing circles. So let's take a quick look at that one as well, shall we?
She's a young girl talking about herself. You can't stop her. She's a young girl talking about herself. She keeps on talking.
So do you ever feel like, you know, while you support trans people and you want everyone to have equal rights, obviously, that some of your opinions you would just never say out loud because you may get labeled transphobic? Well, don't worry. Apparently I'm a transphobe too. And I'm a trans woman.
She doesn't want equal rights. She doesn't believe that non-binary people are trans. She wants to kick them out of the community, doesn't want to equivocate non-binary and binary trans people, or would prefer trans kids commit suicide or suffer mentally and emotionally rather than be given puberty blockers which have literally no adverse effects on them in any way. She doesn't think she's transphobic because she doesn't think that kids and non-binary people are trans, but they are, and therefore, yes, she's transphobic. Sorry. Also, she does shit like spending literally years ruining a trans woman's life by leading an online harassment campaign against her to the point where she still regularly gets downvote bombed for basically no reason other than she wasn't being trans right. And as we've seen, this is still going on. Blaire might not be doing it anymore, or at least as much, but her followers and those she's inspired, like the guy we had a pop out a couple of weeks ago, are definitely still doing this same shit.
So today we are responding to a bunch of people who seem to think that because I don't believe every single minute detail of their belief about trans people and about gender, that makes me transphobic, despite being trans myself.
No, we think that because you say and do transphobic things that you're transphobic. Here's a good example, actually. Take a look at the thumbnail Blaire White made for this video. This is a trans woman who will come up again in a moment because she wrote one of the articles Blaire's going to fail to adequately respond to. Yes. Blaire photoshopped a beard onto a trans woman. Blaire White, the definitely not transphobic person, photoshopped a beard onto a trans woman who disagreed with her. You can't make this shit up, I swear to Christ. You can be trans and transphobic just like you can be gay and homophobic or black and racist. I mean, it's dumb as shit and smacks of deep-seated self-loathing, but it's definitely a thing. Half the people running those gay conversion camps are gay themselves, you know. Oh no, sorry, they used to be gay, but they're not anymore. Skipping some shit about some event she's hosting and moving on to...
So, it's not so much on YouTube, but if you guys follow me on any other social media platforms, which you should, then you would know that my comment sections and my replies are full of people calling me transphobic. Now, half of these people are not aware that I'm trans when they comment it, and then when I reply to them saying that I'm trans, they instantly block me and run away.
Again, being trans doesn't mean that you're incapable of transphobia.
But a lot of them do know, and think that just because I believe that 7-year-olds should not be going to doctor's appointments about how to stop their puberty.
Why do you believe that, though? It's the medical consensus that for trans kids, this is absolutely the best thing to do, and it has zero effect on them growing up. Until anyone actually gives me an answer to this question that doesn't boil down to, won't someone please think of the children, without acknowledging that failure to help trans kids transition can lead to severe mental health issues, I'm afraid that I'm going to continue to trust the doctors and researchers over some woman online who reckons she knows better than the scientific community.
That biologically male athletes should not be able to steal championships and titles from biologically female athletes.
I'm actually working on a video about this, but to be clear here, trans women are not biologically superior to cis women, assuming that they have been on hormones for a while. Estrogen fucking destroys your muscle mass and bone density, and after a couple of years puts trans women on a level playing field with cis women. Sure, you might get the odd trans woman who's either not on HRT or hasn't been for long, or who is just a better athlete than the average cis athlete, but you get these outliers even within cis women, and crucially, the data does not show that trans women are dominating in female sporting events outside of the occasional isolated incident that sends the right-wingers into a frenzy of hatred. The Olympics, for example, has allowed trans women who have been on HRT for longer than 2 years to compete in the women's category since 2004. And surprisingly, we haven't seen every single event dominated by athletically superior trans women in the intervening 15 years now, have we? I wonder why that is.
That it's not transphobic if you don't want to date me, although it does mean you have bad taste.
No one, bar a few extremists, is saying that it's transphobic not to want to date a trans woman. Merely that a lot of the time this preference is born out of an internal prejudice, and maybe this is something we should examine as a society because it's probably unhealthy to reduce one another to our genitals constantly.
All that means that I must just hate trans people.
No, the things you say about trans people, like by comparing them all to sexual predator Jessica Unieve, despite repeatedly saying that the reason you went after her was to show that she wasn't representative of all trans women, make you transphobic.
So here's an article by someone named Rachel Ann Williams. The title is Trans People Can Be Transphobic Too. And can we address the picture of me that they used? I don't even know what this picture is from. Actually, I think I do. This is like a random event I did like at the beginning of the year. You know how far this person had to scour the internet to find this random obscure picture from an event that only had like 100 people there? And like what?
This picture is literally on the first page of Google Images when you search for Blaire White. If anything, I'd say that she didn't go looking hard enough for an unflattering picture, but hey, at least she didn't Photoshop a beard onto you like you did to her. Blaire is actually from the French version of her Wikipedia page. She had to type your name into Google, and depending on the size size of her monitor, maybe not even necessarily have to scroll.
And honestly, what's really funny is I didn't really have to go far to find a horrible picture of this person. I went straight to their profile picture. Tragic.
I don't really know what to say to this. Blaire just doesn't find this person attractive, and that's a gotcha, I guess. Well, I don't think that Blaire White is attractive, although that's probably tinged by the fact that I despise her personally. So have I won some kind of point now?
It starts off by saying, "This might sound petty, but I recently retweeted infamous trans YouTuber Blaire White, and I called her a fascist transphobe. She replied to me, and her 200,000 followers descended upon me quickly."
Yes, she is a fascist transphobe, so I support this.
Yeah, this is someone who decided they wanted to tweet me some ridiculousness, and I like how they always play the victim when I respond. Like, people think they can really say whatever they want to me because it's the internet, and that if I reply, suddenly I'm the one bullying them because I have more followers than them. Where's the logic? Make it make sense.
This is an interesting discussion to have, and it's one that I've become very interested in of late, specifically as it relates to right-wing media criticism and conglomeration of dullards EFAP, and recently with my experience with Literature Devil. See, when a small creator makes a video or tweet about a larger creator, said larger creator has a choice. They can ignore it and pretend that they haven't seen it, try to resolve the situation in private or DM, or go public and make a whole thing about it. Thing is, whilst it may make the most sense to just go after that person, especially if they've just said a bunch of lies about you or are just being a dickhead. The thing is, if you have a massive platform, doing so can possibly mean that a bunch of your fans, especially if you have a fucking horrible fan base like EFAP or Blaire, are inevitably going to go and harass the person they see as attacking their beloved content creator. I do understand the impulse, don't get me wrong. When I first saw Literature Devil's genuinely infuriatingly incorrect response, which again was 5.5 hours long, I wanted to respond, to call him out, and I even actually went to the stream to try and get him to engage with me. But a lot of the time, when it comes to things like this, it's not about honestly engaging with criticism, it's about attacking the other person and weaponizing your fan base against them. And if the power disparity is large enough, it definitely works. My Literature Devil video is now my most viewed and most heavily downvoted video due to the response, and none of the comments from his fans were particularly insightful. In fact, most of them were just abusive. But the fact remains, should public figures just never engage at all? I don't have a solid answer. After all, there are definitely ways and reasons that one should respond publicly, even to a smaller creator if they're saying some harmful shit. But I do think that often the responsible thing to do is probably just attempt to resolve it in private, or, you know, to not be a fascist transphobe.
So this person just babbled in the entire article. Really nothing of it really made sense. Like, they criticized me for being a trans medicalist, which is me believing that being trans is a medical issue, because that's exactly what it is.
No, it's not. Being trans literally only requires you to not identify with the gender one was assigned at birth. It doesn't require any kind of medical diagnosis or transition, like definitionally, I mean.
And just really mad that I don't think non-binary people are the same thing as trans. Too bad, too sad. Whatever. Blaire White literally thinks non-binary people don't exist. She's a transphobe. Okay. Like, honey, I'm very aware you guys exist. You're very loud. You make yourself known. No one's saying you don't exist. I'm just saying you're not the same thing as being trans, and that's okay. And that's not bad.
Again, if being trans is not identifying with the gender assigned to you at birth, both binary and non-binary trans people are trans. That's how words work. And you can't just start arbitrarily pretending that it's not because you're in the same category as people you feel repulsed by.
Why do people only get upset when I say being trans is different than non-binary?
Because you're wrong and making stupid arbitrary distinctions that don't exist.
But yet, people can make all these other distinctions, like pansexual is not the same thing as bisexual, and this sexual is slightly different than this sexuality, and this label is slightly different. Why does everyone get a different label, but I have to be labeled with this? Make it make sense.
I know, it's almost as if sexuality, like gender, is on a spectrum and people can label specifically where they fall on either spectrum however they want, but anything that's not explicitly heterosexual is not straight. The fact that there's not necessarily a word for not straight people as a whole, that I know of, is a whole other discussion, but this point is idiotic.
Blaire White, your hair extensions are crusty, and your internalized transphobia isn't cute. I wish you would stop being recommended on my YouTube, you true scum piece of. So there's a lot to unpack here. The first being that my hair extensions probably cost more than your rent. Just being real.
Obnoxious, classist, rich girl bullshit here, but yes, let's not go after people on the right for their appearance here. I know nothing about hair extensions, but they look fine. They look like hair, which I guess is the point. The problem with Blaire is not her hair, for fuck's sake, it's her opinions and rhetoric.
And the second thing is this internalized transphobia nonsense. I get this all the time too. This is that I secretly hate myself and that I have this internalized hatred for myself being trans, yada, yada, yada. And this one's always particularly hilarious to me because I feel like, you know, I would have maybe not said this when I was a lot younger, maybe when I was a teenager and dealing with gender dysphoria and the struggle of being trans, but like where I'm at now at 26, and I feel like maybe people aren't used to hearing this and the narrative is so different and it's always about how being trans is so hard and I hate it so much and blah, blah, blah. I actually like that I'm trans. Don't get me wrong, there are cons and downsides as there are to any walk of life. However, you just come to a certain point in your life where you actually appreciate what makes you different and what makes you unique. And I feel like there's so many experiences in my life and things I've gotten to do and this channel in many ways and who I've gotten to meet and everything that wouldn't have happened if I was not trans, and I cannot imagine my life any other way. So I actually really love being trans, and if I hated it so much, I don't think I'd have a channel talking about trans issues all the time.
So why are you so concerned with hurting and putting down other trans people and the trans community at large? Also, with the internalized transphobia thing, that's not supposed to mean that you hate yourself, although, you know, maybe you do, I don't know. You do align yourself with people like Ben Shapiro, who believe that you're a deluded man in a dress.
I mean, my feeling on this has been pretty well known for a very long time, which is that pronouns are designed to differentiate between men and women, and that transgender women are not biological women, and that anything that attempts to overcome that argument is obfuscation rather than clarification. Like, you're a transgender woman, and so you're a transgender woman, but to me there is a big difference between a transgender woman and a biological woman, and if we're supposed to use these sort of generic pronouns to refer to men and women, then we ought to be using them at their most root level, which is the biological differences.
It's supposed to mean that you have internalized the expectations of trans people and imposed them on society. Trans people are supposed to do X, Y, Z and so on. You like being trans because you have defined transness as basically being just like you. But there are a lot of trans people, thankfully, who are not like you.
Blaire White is so full of her internalized transphobia, again, makes me sick. What shocks me is that even the LGBTQ plus community supports her. And this is an excellent point that this person brought up. 90% of the people who accuse me of being transphobic are not trans. So honestly, yeah, a lot of LGBT people may not support me, but a lot do. I think more than people realize.
Yes, there are a lot of TERFs and transphobes in the LGBTQ plus community. The LGB movement has been gaining a lot of traction too, and that's just really depressing. Just as an anecdote, when I was in university a few years ago, I was in an LGBT society, and the rival university's equivalent organisation was strictly LGB, which made any kind of meetups or collaborations difficult, if not impossible. And that's without going into the LGB alliance stuff that's been going on in the UK recently.
She's so privileged and then invalidates trans people who can't afford the surgery she's had by saying they're not the same as her. They are literally the same. They just aren't rich and privileged. I'm literally gonna have an aneurysm. Invalidates trans people who can't afford the surgery they've had. When? When have I done that? Make it make sense. Oh, and privileged. Where? I mean, I know people don't really know a lot about my upbringing, but let me just say, I didn't grow up like dirt poor, but I did not grow up with money, honey. Literally every single thing I own and my transition, surgically and everything, was paid and funded for completely by me and the work that I do. I left the house at 18, have supported myself ever since then. My parents never gave me anything in my adulthood. My dad died when I was 19. I did not have a sugar daddy buying me breast implants like half the trans girls out here in LA.
Privilege has nothing to do with upbringing. Blaire White is a rich, influential, conventionally attractive, passing trans woman who just went off on someone and claimed that her hair extensions were worth hundreds of dollars, so let's not pretend that she's not privileged. This person could also have been referring to her other privileges, like her ability to pass, being white, and so on.
I did not have family helping me with surgeries in my transition. Hell, I didn't even have insurance. I paid for everything out of pocket based on the work that I do. Okay.
So you're wealthy enough to afford it then. Privilege, in the strictly financial sense, doesn't mean that your family helped you out, it just means that you're, you know, rich, which you are. Having googled it, apparently you make at least $200k per year, so don't make the I grew up poor card.
I think it's needless to say that it is completely and utterly idiotic to call a trans woman transphobic. Keep in mind, these are the same people who believe that black people and people of color cannot be racist, that it's actually impossible for them to be. This is what they believe about that. So how can they believe simultaneously that I can can be transphobic despite being trans. Make it make sense.
Nope, no one's saying that. This is a 2015 Tumblr meme. Please find better material. You can be a trans woman and also be transphobic, and in fact you are. Stop inventing positions for your opponents to hold so you can make bullshit arguments against a made-up person.
But also, I understand that a lot of people maybe don't know how to take me. I feel like a lot of the times on this channel and on my social media, I'm presenting a sort of side to the trans topic that not many people are used to seeing. I don't talk about things in the way that every single other trans influencer in the world talks about. I don't talk about things in the way that every other trans activist you've ever seen talks about them. I am different. First of all, that should be okay to be different and think different things without suddenly being a hateful person. That's number one.
Yes, if the things you say aren't different because they are hateful, which I'm afraid is very much the case here.
But number two, in a lot of ways, the reason I talk about trans issues and LGBT issues in the way that I do, calling out people like Jessica and Eve and people who make us look terrible, and talking about the other side of young children transitioning, and talking about the trans athlete thing, is because I want to better the public image of trans people. Like, I literally am doing what a lot of trans activists do, just in a different way.
You are bettering the appearance of trans people by throwing people you disagree with, for example non-binary people and non-passing or gender non-conforming trans women, under the bus and excluding them from the conversation. This is the exact shit that the LGB Alliance is trying to do, and cis LGB people did for decades to trans people, try to distance themselves from the elements of the movement the mainstream might struggle to grasp or understand in order to get acceptance for the more palatable parts of the community, even though trans people have been central to the struggle of the LGBTQ+ community for decades. Some of the most major figures at Stonewall were black trans women. Fuck that noise. Non-binary people are just as valid as binary trans people, and Blaire White can fuck off if she thinks that the rest of the LGBTQ+ community is going to stand by while she tries to erase them out of existence. I know I'm not.
Honestly, a lot of trans activists and people talking about this issue have literally no self-awareness of how they're viewed by the outside world. People who aren't trans, people who don't know trans people, who are maybe on the right, maybe Republicans, maybe conservatives. They have no idea how they are viewed. That a lot of the insanity that comes out of the community is not something that goes over well at all with them.
Who cares? Why should anyone change fundamental parts of themselves in order to capitulate and suck up to bigots? Fuck them. It's shit like this that caused a lot of LGBTQ+ people to try to stop pride parades, because what if the bigots think this is what represents us as a community? All those dancing camp gays, skipping a bit where she pats herself on the back for ragging on Jessica and Eve for ages.
There are normal trans people out there who don't believe all these radical things. And why don't those trans people get a voice? There's so many people who talk about how, like, every trans story needs to be heard and we have to listen to trans people and blah, blah, blah. And, like,
those people are the only trans people who get a voice. Just look at YouTube. Name me one gender non-conforming or non-passing trans woman with a massive platform, or at least a platform as significant as Blaire's. I challenge you to do that. Please. I might be wrong. And if I am, please let me know, because I actually want to find some of those creators to watch. Trans women who aren't deemed to be feminine enough aren't given platforms and or places to speak their mind.
Cool, that's great, but why is it only on your terms? Why is there one narrative, and if we don't follow it, then no, everyone should be heard but Blaire White? Like, what are we doing?
Because your rhetoric is harmful to the community at large, and your continued mainstream prominence is perpetuating hateful ideas, as well as giving the far right a token who they can point to and say, hey, we're not transphobic, look, Blaire White agrees with us. She also thinks you should be put in the camps.
Like, honestly, my transition's over. I feel like I live a pretty comfortable life. I don't have to talk about trans issues. I could be doing makeup tutorials and any kind of BS on YouTube if I wanted to.
But that doesn't rake in the right-wing hate bucks now, does it?
However, I have thousands of people write to me every single day that they are so disgusted with the way that trans people are portrayed in the media, all because this is how trans activists and the more radical people on the end of the spectrum are dictating it be portrayed.
As mentioned before, a recent study showed that most of the time in media, trans people, and especially trans women, are most often portrayed as predators or sex workers. Is that idea perpetuated by the trans activists fighting for positive representation, or people like Blaire, who believe that trans activists are inhuman scum who want to forcibly feminize your children? I wonder.
And I'm gonna be here to let you know that no matter how far you push this thing, there are normal, rational, level-headed trans people out there. Most of them do not run with all the crazy nonsense that you think, and it doesn't make them transphobes.
It does if they're being transphobic. Fuck Blaire White.
God bless your transsexual heart. True trans or rebel.
I think that this whole discussion is really rather telling. Blaire genuinely believes that she can't be credibly accused of transphobia because she's trans, even when she says and does blatantly transphobic shit. She can be horrendous, demonize trans people by literally copying a meme format originally used by a fucking neo-Nazi to demonize the LGBTQ+ community, and splitting the community by attempting to push non-binary people out. People like Blaire White frustrate me because they talk about how difficult their struggles were, and then when they overcome them, they turn around and spit on the people behind them. Blaire does this with trans people she doesn't believe to measure up to her ideal of what a trans person should be, even though she's talked about the struggle she went through early in her transition, to the point of saying that non-passing trans women are doing something wrong and need to try harder or do better in some way. I would compare her to J.K. Rowling, and you'll see next week why I make that comparison, who famously lived for years of her life as a poor single mother, living in pretty miserable conditions, and yet now, as a literal billionaire, still feels that she has the right to demonize political figures attempting to make life of people in that same position she was in whilst writing the first Harry Potter book just a little bit easier, just a little bit better, because they might actually tax her, personally, a little bit more. Look, point is, being a member of a marginalized group doesn't mean that you can't be a bigot, even towards that group. But people who do so, whether it be for cynical, money-based reasons, a disdain for those they view as inferior to them, or just self-loathing, are fucking scum. The only way to really, truly solve systemic and societal issues is not by dragging one another down in order to elevate oneself to some ideal of one of the good ones. It's solidarity and intersectionality, but these are ideas the right find difficult to grasp.
Make it make sense.
Gretchen, stop trying to make
Make it make sense.
happen. It's not going to happen.